I've had a fortunate life, but I can tell you now I'm doing this under duress. For one thing, Don's making me laugh. Another thing, I've got 2 black eyes, results of surgery. I'm in my old house clothes, and I wanted to have makeup on and look glamorous. Anyway, here I am. Now, on a serious mode, this is not just my goodbyes. It's Frank's goodbye too, because he's going to be in here with me. When Frank died, I was up in Sydney, and I just felt that my world had come to an end, and the Morgans and the Kamashas helped pick up the pieces, and I want them to know I'm eternally grateful. And even today, Kevin Morgan comes down every birthday and takes me out for my birthday on the 4th of June, which incidentally, Don's probably told you is in July, but it's not. It's the 4th of June. Now, perhaps I'll tell you about the first time I drove to Melbourne on my own. I was always nervous, and I always used to get on a bus or get on a train, but you needed a car when you got here. They all said, you don't need a car, Mum. There's plenty of cars here, but nobody ever give you the keys. I looked at him then because he never gave me the keys. And I looked up at Frank's ashes in his workshop where I kept them because that's where he was always the happiest. And I said to him, come on, get in the boot. This is too big for me. And I put his ashes in the boot and I drove him to Melbourne with me. I did it in 2 days, and from then on I had complete confidence, and I lost count of how many times I drove backwards and forwards to Melbourne. I've got little notes here if you see me looking down. I first met Frank in 1944. I was 17 and he was 18. He was in the 103rd AGH at Borkham Hills, which was an army hospital. He'd been injured in the Cowra breakout. We were only kids, but we knew even then that we'd end up together. But it wasn't until 1948 that we married, and I came to Melbourne to live. Now, we lived in, those days you couldn't rent houses, and if anybody moved out, you'd see a moving van there, and you'd follow it to see where it was going, so that you would see if the house was to rent. Anyway, Betty Goulet and Jim Goulet was in one room at Moreland, and we squatted. They moved out, we moved in, didn't tell the landlord. And she rented this house, and it had rooms, a big hallway, and rooms going off it. And among them was the people living there was the Grocotts. And that's where Yvonne met her first boyfriend, Barry Grocott. He was 18 months old when she was born, and he loved Yvonne, and he called her Mimi. From there, and my dad lent us the money, and we built our first house. Frank and Alan and Donnie Gribble built it at East Bentley, which was all swamp and market gardens, and they built it out of a book. We only lived in that house for 3 years. Floss and Alan lived just around the corner. But we lived there for 3 years. It was only a 2-bedroom, and we had a boy and a girl, so we had to do something. And we built on the corner of, we built in Deeger Avenue. And our house became the, what can I say, it was the meeting place for all the local kids. I'm looking at my notes now. I'm sorry, Dom.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath and then look at the camera and then start again. Where you're up to.
Okay. It was all market gardens.
Look at the camera.
And it was swamps. And they used to have boats on it.
No. Go back to the meeting house. It was the magnet.
Oh, our house was a magnet for the local children. We were the first ones with television, and they used to all come watch Lassie. They all had to take their shoes off, and they all had to sit on the floor because there were just not enough seats, not for the multitude of kids that were there. And they'd watch Lassie and cry all the way through it. Oh, they tell you, oh, Mrs. Trapton, this is a lovely movie. They were beautiful. And then I thoroughly enjoyed the kids growing up. They were great years, and I'm going to turn over my page. Just little notes. You're allowed to do that. That's because that's what's his name? Not our Prime Minister, what's his name? Rudd. He had the notes and he wasn't supposed to. Well, I'm allowed to. I enjoyed... Sorry, but I did enjoy the children growing up. Don was a bit of a handful. I remember the time we had Frank and Alan, we had a bonfire night. Frank and Alan built the biggest bonfire you ever saw. We'd arranged for Happy Hammond and Professor Ratbaggy from the Happy Hammond show. They only lived around the corner. They were to come and light it. And Alan and Frank made this massive Guy Fawkes, spinning wheels for the eyes and complete size of a man. And they sat it on the outside dunny. That's where it stopped overnight. But poor Don, the day of the bonfire, Mary Carey told me that he'd been into a bit of strife over at her place. He'd gone over to play at Carey's place, and Johnny Carey wasn't home. So he thought, well, he saw George's shoes and he thought he'd give him a bit of a shine, a bit of a polish. The only thing was they were brown shoes and he cleaned them with black boot polish. Then she said he cut up 60 feet of hose. And she said all her washing was on the ground. And it wasn't until later years that I found out that the 60 feet of hose, she was fortunate because it was the chooks he was trying to catch. He thought they'd like a nice chook for dinner and he was trying to catch them and he couldn't, so he practised on the hose. He was hitting Mary's washing like this, and gradually, of course, it went to pulling like this, and that's how come that landed on the ground. There's no excuse for the shoes. Anyway, she told me on the day of the bonfire, so he was banned. He wasn't allowed to go. But that was punishment. But all the local kids felt sorry for him, and they brought their crackers over, and he was on our front veranda. And he had more crackers than anybody else at the bonfire. And then I remember Alec Goulay saying to Frank, oh, Frank, will you have a look at Don? He had a skyrocket headed down the hallway. It was in the garden, but it was headed down the hallway. And Frank just grabbed it and shoved it in the ground and put it out before it went through the house. But the determination that Don had in those days was a great asset to him in later years, because even today, if he thinks he's right in something, he'll stick by his guns and you won't move him. If he knows he's right, that's how in business it's the same today. I remember the kids, the next phrase was their ballroom days. They both learnt ballroom dancing when they were young. And as you know, girls grow at a faster pace than boys, and there's only 18 months between them. But Yvonne was up here and so were her girlfriends, and Don was down here, just bosom height, and he'd have his head on their boobs and he'd be dancing around like this. And Frank used to say, oh, look at the lucky beggar, you know. And the girls, because he was such a good dancer, the girls used to fight over who was going to dance with him. From there we moved on to what I think was really the best years of our lives. And they were the years of high school, when all the boys used to come round. There was Glenn Manley, Ken Trembath, Ian Dickey. There were so many of them, and we had a gymnasium in the garage, so we always knew where they were, because you'd hear bang, 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 with the speedball and punching ball, but they weren't allowed to do it after 9 o'clock because Betty Price next door used to growl. Anyway, I can tell you now, if Glenn Manley and Ken Trembath aren't here today listening to this, I'm going to come back and haunt you. Because we had wonderful times. Remember, I'd put the tea on, take us down, Don would say, pick us up after school, Mum, and I'd take you all round, pick all your gear up, take you down to Brighton, turn the tea off, come back, turn the tea on again. And then there was the time that you went down to Wilson's prom, and you were going to go away for this school holidays or something. I'd never ever had driven a trailer, but I had the trailer on the back. I had no idea I'd never driven a trailer before in my life. You lot loaded everything on the trailer. I drove down there, couldn't turn around, just straight down, and then took everything off. Then you had to turn it round and aim me home again. And I've never driven a trailer since, but we did all right. You kids had a good time. Also, those years were good because Dad used to get up. I'm saying Dad, it's Don's dad I'm talking about, because I think you all called him Mr. T and you called me Mrs. T. He used to get up sometimes 4 o'clock in the morning and take us down skin diving, and you'd go and get the fish and we'd cook it on the beach. Frank would have the fire and then we'd cook it and eat it there on the beach. And I remember too, with your cars, he used to work on all your cars, put on exhaust pipes, and you know the best part? When you kids all got new cars, you didn't just ping off and leave us. Every one of you boys, when you got new cars, you brought it round for Frank to have a look at. And I was so pleased you did that. That was a nice thing to do, to show what nice boys you were. Eva and Don got married, and then we moved to Sydney, because Frank always loved the warmer climate. Our grandkids come along, and they all came up to visit, and we started the new phrase in our life. Now I've got to turn my notes over. Frank took up bowling, and he just enjoyed it. But in 1988, that was, well, to that point, it was the worst year of my life because I lost Frank. And the Morgans and the Kamashes were there to pick up the pieces. And even today, they always had, even before Frank died, they had us over there for every Christmas Day. And then after that, every Mother's Day, every Christmas, every birthday, the Morgans had me over there. They gave me my first party. They gave me the 70th birthday party, a surprise party. But even today, they come down every birthday. The Morgans come down from Tamworth on the 4th of June. Don will tell you it's July, but my birthday's in June. And they take me to the Cuckoo Club. It could be in other clubs if it's not my birthday, but it's not, I say the Cuckoo Club, it's a Cuckoo restaurant. But it was sky high this year because the didn't fall. The Cuckoo Club wasn't open on my birthday. Sometimes it might be Clover Cottage, but they always come down on my birthday and take me out. Next year he's reminded me it'll fall on a Wednesday and the Cuckoo Club's open. So that's where we'll be. The day that the Morgans told me that they bought land in Tamworth was the day I decided I was going to move back to Melbourne. I didn't move straight back after Frank had died, and that's why his ashes were never sent up there. When Frank died, we knew the funeral director, and he said, because he was a bowler, and he said to me, what are you going to do with Frank's ashes? And I said, well, they stop with me. Because if I left them in Sydney, I wasn't ready to, I would be tied to Sydney and I wouldn't be able to come back to Melbourne. And I always knew eventually one day I would come back because this is where my children and my grandchildren were. And I came back here in 2004, and that was when the Morgans told me they were going to move to Tamworth. But I still drove all the way from Melbourne to Tamworth several times, making several trips along the way. Then, once back in Melbourne, I joined with my sister Floss, I joined the Narre Warren Seniors and made a new lot of friends. And I'm not over religious, but I do have a deep understanding of, I believe there is a God, and I believe He looks after me. Because in 2013 came my second biggest loss, and that was the loss of Yvonne. You have to excuse this little bit, but if it wasn't for you, my friends from the club, from Narre Warren Seniors, and Orianne, my dear sister Floss and Alan, I don't know what I would have done. Floss loved Yvonne as much as I did, but she still came and looked after me. She gave many of you cups of tea. Excuse this little bit, but that's part of my life. And I'm putting the pieces together now. And everything's going to be fine. Because I know that she's with her dad. And one day I'll be with them too. And when you're listening to this, that's where I'll be. And I tell you, I wouldn't be in a different place for all the tea in China. That's where I want to be. I only have one regret, when I say probably many regrets. One is that I'm putting this turn on now, and another regret is that I never told my dad, or my mother, but mainly my dad, that I loved him. Dad lent me the money for the first block of land, and I can't ever remember telling my parents that I love them. But they didn't in those days. But I never ever hung up the phone from Yvonne or Don without saying, love you dearly. And they always replied back, love you too, Mum. And that's something to remember. Love you dearly. I think that was my main regret. And I think that might be the end of my notes. So goodbye, folk. Now I'm happy because if you're listening to this, that's where I want to be. Thank you.